Welcome to Conor's Crew, a podcast about positive people doing positive things. I'm Conor, and this show is all about speaking to people who take action and make the world a better place. Today's guest is adventurer, broadcaster, author, and former University of Dundee Rector, Mark Beaumont. Best known for cycling around the world in a record-breaking 78 days, Mark has spent his life pushing the limits of human endurance while inspiring others to think big and embrace adventure. We talk about his incredible expeditions, resilience, and what he's learned from traveling the world, and also his connection to Dundee. Let's get into it. Hi, everyone. Today I am with Mark Beaumont. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Absolute pleasure. Yeah, good to be with you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. For people who maybe don't know who you are, tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I used to be an athlete. I used to do major. I mean, I still keep fairly fit. I've pedaled around planet Earth a couple of times. Hold the world record for the circumnavigation, 78 days to go, 18,000 miles. The length of Africa. Done expeditions to over 100 countries. Started my career making BBC documentaries. These days, I run quite an interesting investment firm backing Scottish entrepreneurs and business owners trying to make the world a slightly better place. And yeah, I'm still interested in lots of grassroots sort of expeditions and also quite broad involvements in a number of interesting charities, including the Entrepreneurial Scotland and the My Name's Doddy Foundation. And I guess in the context of this conversation, I grew up near Blairgowrie on a wee farm and went to Dundee High School and used to be the rector at the University of Dundee.
That's fantastic. So you've achieved some amazing things, broke lots of records, and been on so many adventures. You mentioned you grew up in Scotland. How did growing up in Scotland shape your love of the outdoors?
I was very fortunate insofar as I was homeschooled until secondary school. I say fortunate. I mean, I chose not to homeschool my children, but what that growing up in the foothills of the Highlands on the road north of Blairgowrie heading up to Glenshee gave me was a huge amount of time in the outdoors. I probably spent an hour or two around the kitchen table each day doing subjects, and the rest of the time was just working on the farm. Every morning there was 200 chickens to collect the eggs from, there was 60 goats to milk, there was 13 horses to put out, muck out, there was a farm to run. And so, that work ethic was there from the start, because I was out with my parents, building dry stone dikes and fixing stables and just being physical. So being on the tools was something that I had from the very start. Even when I went to high school in Dundee, it was still closer to go to Glenshee than it was to go to school. I had a season ticket there till I was 16. So my great love for the outdoors was not something I had to go to, do Scouts or Duke of Edinburgh for. I was just in the outdoors all the time. So getting into expeditions from an early age seemed a pretty natural thing to do. I was 12 when I pedalled across Scotland. I was 15 when I soloed from John O'Groats to Land's End, and it all just came from this this childhood where I was, outside all the time.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and that all sounds amazing. So you mentioned you've been exposed to the outdoors your whole life. Was there a specific moment where you thought, adventure, that's what I want to do. I want to build my life around adventures, around Scotland, around the world. Was there a specific moment where you thought, this is it?
I mean, there was definitely never sort of a career plan around it. I had no reference points as a boy or a young man that this could be a job and a career. I was definitely just following my passion as opposed to thinking, how am I going to make money? There's easier ways to to make a living, that's for sure. So yeah, I mean, the formative experience for me to get out and do my first cycle rides, to become a ski instructor, to compete quite seriously in horse riding, was just following my passion. The fact that I then, in my early adult life, left university, decided not to join a graduate scheme, and decided to put my passion straight into major projects. I mean, that's the right time in your life to take a risk. You've got nothing to lose. I didn't have, family or mortgage or anything to worry about. So, it was absolutely the right time to figure out what was possible. And my first pedal around the planet when I was 23, 24 years old was a real sort of coming of age adventure where I didn't have a huge amount of idea what I was doing, but what could possibly go wrong. And I remember sort of pedaling through Iran and Pakistan and across the Australian outback, and it was half a year on my own where I really got to grow up and learn about the world and try and make sense of it in a way that I could share it for my first TV program. So yeah, I mean, it's always challenging, isn't it, when you sort of look back and go nature, nurture, what was it? I've got very different outlooks and very different career than my sisters, and we had exactly the same childhood. So I think just saying because that's what I had, that's what I became, is probably a bit too simple. But I was certainly given a huge amount of support in my early life to back my own ideas. I think I think one of the real challenges with young people is being sort of pushed into things where they don't really make a personal choice. And I think the greatest thing that any young person can learn is to actually back their own ideas. You can be book smart, you can do well, but ultimately people go through their entire lives just being told what to do by other people, and you've really got to build the habit to say, well, I'm not living somebody else's life, I'm living my own, and I back myself and I back my ideas. I'm not waiting for somebody else to give me the approval.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I totally agree. And the city of Dundee, I suppose that's played quite a big part in your life, your early life, and also later on. What does the city of Dundee mean to you today?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't choose Dundee. I was where my parents decided to put me into high school, and I found it challenging to begin with. When you're growing up homeschooled on the farm, and then you end up getting thrown into Dundee city centre in a school of 12 over 1,000 kids. I found that very intimidating. So I've got very mixed memories of high school, and the city itself was very different back in the 90s. I think I've got to know Dundee better and with more fondness actually since I left school. And I think that's more to do with who I am as a person, and that transition from being grown up and where I was. So a lot of my friends are still back in Dundee. I had a long period where I was engaged with the university and everything that happens on Perth Road. Interacted with a lot of the big employers in the city, Alliance Trust and Insights and others. And so seeing the waterfront transform over the years, seeing the development plans going forward, seeing how the city has tried to maintain the best of its history whilst also reimagining itself, I think's fantastic. And it's not easy for a city like it's not easy for a city like Dundee to really sort of create that new identity for itself, but it's done so. Through people like Chris Van de Kaal and gaming, and through a lot of the life science and healthcare technology that it's developing. It's a city which is always trying to sort of reimagine itself. And it's my little sister is a midwife at Nine Wells. Both of my daughters were born in Dundee. So I've got many, many reasons to come back. My mum still lives just outside. So I'm now in my 40s, and it's amazing how the city of Dundee has changed even within the 30 plus years I've known it.
Oh, definitely. I myself have lived in Dundee for the past 8 years, and even in that time, I've noticed changes. And I think the city's got so much to celebrate. There's so many great achievements within the city, and it's I think it's continuously going from strength to strength. Every city has its problems, but I think there's a lot to be proud of within Dundee. Um, you mentioned your first adventure when you were 12 years old. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I was inspired by an article in the Dundee Courier about some guy who had cycled from land end to end, Landvinge on a Groats, and I had no idea how far that was or what that entailed, but it was definitely a journey that got me thinking. And I remember going to the farm car, the Land Rover, and getting the AAA road map, the old paper map, and finding a highlighter pen and finding the roads the length of Britain and presenting it to my parents and saying, "Can I do this?" And mum rightly said, "Why don't you try something slightly smaller first? Because you've not really cycled off the farm before." So that's where the idea for going from Discovery Point, Dundee, through to Oban, 145 miles,
Yeah.
took root. And I mean, the ride was fun, 45 miles a day. We went to Aberfeldy the first day, across to Craiglark, and then across. But the thing which I really loved about that was the planning of it and then the storytelling afterwards. So going door to door in Blairgowrie and fundraising for a couple of charities. Afterwards, getting to present a charity check to Princess Royal and getting my story in the paper. And at that age, when I was just transitioning from homeschooling to schooling, having something that was truly mine, having something that I could be proud of, having something that was my identity, as opposed to, I was really struggling with the playground, which was all about football and rugby and things that I had no idea about. So it was really, I think, something I grabbed onto. It sort of became part of my identity at that. Most kids build a social construct and a sense of who they are with others at the age of 3, 4, 5. I didn't do that till I was 12, 13, 14. I was just me and my sisters on the farm. So I think adventure for me came at the right time to sort of give me something that was mine. And that first adventure across Scotland, of course I wanted to go further. And that's where, by the time I was 15, I was going the length of Britain. By the time I was leaving school, I was doing big trips through Europe. And whilst there was never a plan to turn this into my job, I was just each year building on the ambition, each year building on the experience. So, the inevitable, once you take that to the nth degree, the ultimate nth degree is the world. Where else are you going to take this? And
Yeah.
February 2005, Ellen MacArthur sailed around the world, and her sporting feat transcended the world of sailing. And as a non-sailor, I looked at that and went, "Wow, that's extraordinary. I want to do that, but on a bike."
Hmm. It's fantastic. And you mentioned that your mum, when you were about to do that cycling adventure, your mum said, "We'll start with a smaller ride first." What were your parents' reactions over time? Were they always encouraging, or were they ever slightly worried at times?
Um, yeah, they were broadly supportive. I mean, my mum ended up working with me and for me for a decade and a half. So when my
Yeah.
parents divorced when I was 16, my my mum, worked with me, supported me throughout my sort of student years, and then what was just mum supporting son then became a professional relationship where we became colleagues. So throughout my 20s and through to my mid 30s, mum was what we always joked as base camp, but she was, we had big teams and we had BBC projects and we had global people sort of working on these projects across media, logistics, performance. But at the heart of it was base camp, was mum. So no, and I think the thing I admire about my mum is she's always had the ability to take her mum hat off and just be a colleague, just trust me, because a lot of stuff that I've done has had an element of risk and uncertainty, and it'd be so easy for her just to say, "Look, son, I don't want you to be doing that." So for her ability just to completely trust me and allow me to get on with, what I was qualified to do was amazing. I sort of think about that now in the context of my own daughters and go, wow, could I imagine in 15 years' time where my daughter employs me to support her ambitions? It was quite something that my mum did.
That's absolutely amazing, and it's really lovely that you've always had that support. Now I want to ask you about cycling around the world. Absolutely amazing. So when people hear about cycling around the world, a lot of people will think, "Wow, that's so difficult. How is it possible?" What does a normal day look like on that journey around the world? What would a normal day consist of?
Well, we've got to differentiate the first time and the second time. The first time around the world, when I was in my early 20s, I was unsupported. So when you're unsupported, you've got to find your next meal. You've got to figure out where you're going to pitch your tent every night. You're sort of relying on the friendship of strangers to get through and get by. That's a very different thing than when you've got a full support team. So by the time 10 years later I was racing with a full support team, I was not having to worry about any of that. So first time around the world on my own, uh, my mum back in Scotland, sort of with a laptop, trying to sort of figure out how she could help with border crossings and police escorts going around, the Baluchi Desert in southern Pakistan and all sorts of exciting stuff. But ultimately, I'm on my own, and I was riding about 100 miles a day for half a year. By the time I came back around the world the second time, that looked like kindergarten. And I'm up at 3:30 in the morning on the bike at 4, riding 16 hours a day, averaging 240 miles a day every single day for 2.5 months. So, you're going twice the amount of hours a day on the bike, 16, not 8. And for every hour you're riding much faster. So, I mean, the second time around the world, whilst it's no longer about the cultural experience, it is a much, much, much more professional, harder thing. Lots of people could fall out of university and do the first version of what I did. It would take years and years and years of training and finance and support to do what I did the second time around. And when the record was, I retook the record in 2017, and nobody's come close to it since. I mean, I'll be excited to see when somebody does break the record, but that was the sum total of everything I'd learned since I was a 12-year-old kid. And the idea that you could just sort of train hard in the garage and go out there and go sub 78. It's a very, very, very hard and complicated project to put together. But you're no longer really you're riding through every sunrise and sunset for 2.5 months, but you're no longer really experiencing the world. It's just a time trial for 1,100 hours.
It's so interesting to hear about some of the differences between both times that you've done that. I can imagine it must be really physically demanding, but also mentally demanding as well. What parts of it are mentally difficult, and how do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, the mental side of it is all about experience. You can learn the physical training, you can learn, how to plan it and the logistics and the nutrition and the aerodynamics and all the rest of it. But the ability to suffer well, the ability to live in your own head for months at a time, the ability to keep going when other people would quit, that's something that you have to have lived experience for. You can listen to any number of podcasts and read all the books, but ultimately you've got to be very comfortable in your own skin, being uncomfortable, and you've got to be able to be operating in that space. It's that old adage: everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And so many riders I've seen going, oh, I'll do this, I'll do that, and then you get out there and you've just got no idea what that feels like. The sheer attrition of being that sleep deprived and riding 16 hours a day for 2.5 months. It rolls off the tongue. It sounds pretty straightforward, but it's a very different skill set from just being a bike racer. So how do you deal with it? I mean, it's pretty glib just to say experience, but you've got to know yourself well. You've got to be able to have a wry smile when it's tough. I'm not a big fan of positive mindset and pretending you're happy when you're not. I think you've got to call a shit day shit. You've got to be real about the situation you're in. And I think it's really important to just absolutely own it. You can't distract yourself. You can distract yourself if it's a 90-minute game, but you can't distract yourself if it's a 2.5-month race. It's your life and you're in it, and nobody else has told you to do it. You've decided to do it. So there's nobody to blame. And I think that level of ownership around how hard it is and understanding the difference between the result and the process. Everyone wants the result, but can they actually sort of live the process? So there's a lot in that, but ultimately, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3". I'm 95 kilos. I've not done what I've done because I'm the best bike racer. I've done what I've done because I'm meticulous around planning. I completely value the support of an amazing team around me, and I understand that whilst everyone else looks at the big picture, the world, you don't actually cycle around the world. You just cycle a little bit further every day, and one day you get back to where you started. And understanding a major project from the perspective of what you actually have to do, as opposed to the result that everyone else talks about, is pretty fundamental.
That's an excellent answer. And on the first time and the second time, on both of those adventures, were there any moments where you thought about giving up?
Um, yes. Uh, yeah, because of course there was moments when things were going catastrophically wrong.
Hmm.
Second time around the world, just east of Moscow, I crashed, and when I took the crash with my outstretched left hand in my face, I broke some. I pushed in some teeth and broke a tooth in two, and I fractured my radial head, which is the small bone in your elbow. So when you've got a fractured elbow and you're trying to shovel 8,000, 9,000 calories down through broken teeth, yeah, you got a problem. In Australia, we wrote off one of the support vehicles in a very major crash where, the consequences from it being slightly more serious is that, people would have died. And, we're so lucky to have just written off the vehicles. I had 5 crashes going around the world the second time. We got stuck on border crossings. The headwinds and the wildfires going across the Midwest were absolutely brutal. Just Groundhog Day, just the flattest part of the world where I thought I'd be flying, and the reality was it was the slowest part. So the answer is yes, of course. There was moments where, I couldn't really imagine beyond the next half hour, let alone the next months. But I just needed to find a way to sort of rebuild that momentum and keep going. I mean, I guess my framework for keeping going is always 3 words: safe, finish, fun. Safe. People often give up because they're not having fun, but you notice that fun comes below finish. So safe, finish, fun. The only reason I wouldn't finish is if it was unsafe to do so. And somewhere along the line, remember to have fun. You put yourself in these situations, try and enjoy it. But the idea of it's too hard, I'm going to give up, that's fine if you're an amateur and you're writing your own checks. But if you've got sponsors, that's the equivalent of not going to work because you can't be arsed. It's no longer your choice. As long as it's safe to carry on, it's your professional obligation to do what you said you would do. And I think that's often missing in adventure sports. But it's fundamentally important to hold yourself to that level of accountability.
No, absolutely, and it's so impressive that even though you've experienced those challenges along the way, you still finished successfully, and that's so impressive. You've been to so many countries on those journeys. Were there any countries in particular that really surprised you the most?
Yeah, and quite pertinent to where we are today. Iran would stand out as one of my absolute favorites. Cycling through Iran, I slept in mosques every night. It would be like cycling across, the UK and being able to sleep in a church in any village or town. The welcome I had with the Iranian, people was extraordinary. Sudan, going through the Sahara Desert, the Chinese have probably built the best roads in the world. It's like a velodrome. It's very fast. And down to Khartoum was just stopping at truck stops. And again, maybe I'm picking out these places because they were the most different from what I expected. If I was to talk about New Zealand, yeah, it's great, but it's just like Scotland on the other side of the world. People always go to New Zealand and go for this exotic experience, and I think it's great, but it's kind of everything that you know already. Whereas you go to these parts of the world which are, linguistically and culturally so different, and you come back seeing the similarities rather than the differences, and that's what travel's about. I mean, proper travel. I don't mean go to a hotel and sit on a beach. I mean, like, where you're really getting to earn those miles and take yourself through landscapes and cultures.
Well, totally, totally. And so you've been to so many countries, and along the way, you've met so many people. So on your travels, did it change your views on humanity as a whole? Did it make you more optimistic about humanity?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be streetwise. I've had the privilege to go to about 130 nations and territories. So you've definitely got to be streetwise. But yeah, I mean, I guess repeating what I previously said, the more you travel, the more you see similarities rather than differences. And you realize by definition, our worldview is normally written by the news, and the news by definition is when things are out of the ordinary. So if your worldview is based on when things are out of the ordinary, i.e., it's newsworthy, then you normalize the news as the ordinary, whereas it's not. So if we're hearing about things at the geopolitical level or, the political level, it's very off-putting because you're never hearing about the normal, the people, the mundane, and so that sense of the ordinary and the absolute wonder in terms of places. And I guess when you then get to cycle through countries, you do genuinely understand how one thing becomes the next. And we so often miss that when we just fly in somewhere and then compare it to home. There's very few places in the world where you have a really sharp juxtaposition and change. I can think of a few border crossings, let's say Sudan into Ethiopia, or maybe crossing from El Paso into Juarez, from the US into Mexico, where, there really is a fence line and everything changes. But most changes don't happen like that. Normally there's just a slow aggregation of change. And I find that absolutely fascinating, because as I say, it does allow you to see the commonality rather than the difference.
Yeah. And on these expeditions and adventures, have you had moments where you've felt lonely? And if so, how do you manage that?
Yes, the answer is yes. But I think the most frequently asked question from my trips, especially the solo ones, is, do you get lonely? Do you get bored? Because I think it comes with an assumption that if you're on your own, you're lonely. But I think people could be lonely on the London Underground. Is being lonely is not about the amount of people around you. Being lonely is about how engaged you are, how interested you are, how supported you are. So you can have love and support without having people next to you. And I think we also live in a world where you're doing sort of 20 different jobs a day, and when you're not doing a job, you're staring at your phone. And I think I always encourage people to try and go on journeys, even if it's go for a run or go for a walk, without headphones in and without technology distracting you, because these days the ability to be in your own head and to live with your own thoughts is becoming a really sort of scarce pastime. And I think it's something I've always done, from when I was a homeschool child. And you can tell I'm not like an introverted kid who doesn't like talking to people, quite the contrary, but I'm also very comfortable in my own skin. And if you said that, you don't have your phone and you don't have music and you don't have podcasts and you just need to spend a week traveling, and I'm not even, I'm going to give you an old paper Mac, I'm going to be perfectly happy. I'm going to be perfectly happy. And I would really, if people's natural assumption to being divorced from company or divorced from technology is that the space that you'll naturally end up is lonely or bored, then I think that sort of probably speaks to your habits and your habits to constantly be distracted and entertained.
Yeah.
And by definition, if you're going to go around the world in 78 days on a bicycle riding 16 hours a day, you need to get pretty used to your own thoughts.
Of course. And going round the world twice, I imagine you have got used to your own thoughts. So on these journeys and expeditions, what have you learned about yourself?
I think that's probably the hardest question of all, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's very hard to get you out of your own head to the point where, at the most simple level, I've worked out that I can do these things. I've built, a quiet confidence. If I'm on the start line of an event and I know I'm not the fastest or the most powerful, but my personal belief, whether it's founded or unfounded, is that I can outsuffer most people. I back myself. I believe in my own ability to complete tasks. And I think perhaps having met so many people and traveled so much, when I'm then in business doing the other work that I do around investments, I think it gives me a good level of I don't know what the right word is, empathy, emotional intelligence. I've spent my entire adult life trying to be understood by cultures outside of the ones that you know. So I've been,
Hmm.
there's a lot of time and training there around am I being understood and how to get by. So I remember when I was in my early 20s, David Peat, the great late David Peat, who was a filmmaker for BBC Scotland, said to me, look, Mark, in your career, try and become valued for who you are, not for what you do. And in the Western world, we sort of value ourselves by our job title and, our ability to fix stuff and know stuff. And this idea of being valued because of who you are beyond their technical ability is really interesting. And I think that's definitely something that I've learned as the years have gone on, that actually, you know, the value that I bring to all the projects that I do is not any one thing. In the knowledge-based economy, which is being torn up in the AI world, it really is your ability to show up consistently, the trust that people have in you, that ability to be relevant, step forwards when other people step back, do hard things first, all that stuff. So maybe that comes from expeditions. I find that hugely helpful, whether we're talking about family or work or sport.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's more just a way of thinking about life other than like a specific skill set.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent answer to quite a difficult question. Now, I'd like to ask you about your time as rector in the University of Dundee. What did that role mean to you?
Well, the role of rector is rather undefined, and people do different things with it. I felt that there was the opportunity. Some people don't turn up at all, and it's just a sort of a dignified role, or they maybe just turn up and do graduations. I was enrolled for 3 years, and my main relationship was with DUSA, with the sports association, and a little bit with the student association, and a little bit with the sports association. Um, but I thought, look, if I'm going to take this role, other than doing graduations and being on the board, because a lot of people who are rectors don't even turn up for the board meetings. But
Mm.
I thought, look, if I'm going to do it, I want to actually be involved. It's an unpaid role. It's a pro bono role. Um, but I decided to try and pick a couple of very specific focus points. One was about the University of Dundee at that point had been voted time and time again as best student experience in Scotland. So people loved it. People really enjoyed being students and living around Perth Road. But then they didn't stay. Nobody stayed. And so why was this a great place to study where nobody wanted to stay? So what I tried to do during my 3 years was to create a better relationship between the undergrad population and the major employers in the city. So reached out to the firms, tried to create summer internship opportunities, tried to create a couple of events where the businesses, the major employers in the city would showcase what they did and the opportunities to stay. So that bit about life outside of Perth Road, and if this is such a great place to study, then could it be a great place to stay and work? That was one part. And the other big focus was around mental health. And we did the installation of the Black Dog statue and created a safe space for students to be able to meet and be mentored and speak to each other, and created some peer groups where people could get support that they needed. So those were the two things that I tried to work on during the 3 years I was rector.
Yeah, that's fantastic and so important as well. So I'm a former Dundee student. You're a former Dundee Uni rector. What advice would you give to Dundee students today, or students at any university? What advice would you offer them?
I guess I would go back to something we spoke about 20 minutes ago, which is education's great, education's important, but ultimately building the quiet confidence to back your own ideas. So we go through, primary, high school, university, whatever that pathway looks like, and we think our value in life is whether we got an A or a C. And you very quickly figure out, especially as I say, in the world we now live in, where the knowledge-based economy is being changed beyond recognition, that your value is your creativity, your value is your trust, your behaviors. Can people depend on you? your ability to have a wry smile when the chips are down, and the ability for you personally to not define your success by what other people want you to do. You know, even your parents, it's so easy just to say, well, I'm pleasing people, because we spend our childhoods and our early adult life trying to please people, you know, getting the grades and, you know, being speaking to our parents or our teachers or our lecturers, and it's all about proving ourselves, which is great. That's what education is. But then you've got to flip the script, and you've got to get to the point where you meet everyone on the level. Doesn't matter who they are. You're polite, but you're not deferential, and you know you're going. You know, I'm in the driving seat of what I do. You know, I can listen, I can learn, and that's always a really important part. But life is not about other people hoping that other people will spot you and create opportunities. Life is about, you know, having ideas and doing them, whether people have given you the opportunity or not, you know, breaking down those and, you know, that's not about being a maverick. That's not about being disruptive, but that's just about feeling like you're creating the change. You're not just, I always say to people, like, when people say to me in interviews, I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that. And I say, well, yeah, that's the company you kept. That's the places that you were in. But what did you actually do? Were you driving that change, or were you just in the room at the time? And I think that success by association defines so many people's careers. You know, they can talk about, you know, I went to this school and I went to this university and I worked for that company. And it's sort of, you sort of make all sorts of assumptions about what that means about the individual. It doesn't mean anything. It just means you were there. And so I really encourage young people to think about what it means to create change and not just be in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And what do universities give people beyond a degree?
Well, I think if you spend your time at university just studying, then, you know, it is very hard to do what I just said and have the quiet confidence to differentiate yourself. So I think what it does is universities fundamentally give you time. They give you time to figure out who you are as an adult. They give you time to mature, to network, to reimagine yourself, to have experiences which, you know, once you're outside of the universities you're never gonna have the time, and they're gonna cost a lot more. So, you know, the clubs and the networks and the abilities to socialize and to learn those adult skills is just so fundamentally important. The sum total of your university experience should not be, you know, your 2-2, your 2-1, or your first. It should be about the time that you spent and how that left an impression on you as a person.
Over the years, Dundee has changed so much. What excites you the most about Dundee's future?
I think more broadly, I've been spending quite a lot of time in the investment space trying to figure out, you know, what Scotland's place in the world is. And
Yeah.
we need to make sure that, you know, all the Scottish cities are a real a space for innovation, for, you know, global relevance and how they work together. So I think Dundee has a fundamentally important space, as does Aberdeen and all the major centres outside of the central belt, to create that sort of footprint for what Scotland is more globally. I think there's a real risk if it just becomes about Edinburgh and Glasgow, and I think Dundee's a
Yeah.
really important counterpoint, not just because of the universities, but also because of the innovation and the businesses coming out of it. And, you know, fundamentally, I think more at the community level, you know, just making sure it's a great place to live and for people to enjoy. Dundee's got quite a big catchment area. So as you grow up into Angus and across to Fife and, you know, Perthshire and beyond, it's got quite a bit, even like Clackmannanshire, it's got quite a good big catchment area as sort of as an ecosystem. And I think understanding that, Dundee's always sort of been quite outward looking, and it should remain that way. So I don't want to put it on a leaderboard, but it does have a very different character to other Scottish cities, and it's got a lot going for it, a lot of challenges as well. So yeah, I think it's a pretty exciting time, and I think Dundee has made great strides in the last 20 years since I left it as to its identity in Scotland and more broadly.
Yeah, each Scottish city has got so much to offer in different ways. There's so many great things about each of the Scottish cities. Do you think that resilience can be learned?
Um, yeah, I don't think you're born with it, so that's the opposite question. Yeah, so it can absolutely be learned. Whether people want to learn and how they learn is a different question. But yes, of course, you know, humans are at their best when they're striving. Learning to be uncomfortable with the outcome and therefore learning how to be resilient is something that you've just got to be in.
Yeah. Um, so in your life, you've written books, you've made documentaries, you've run businesses as well. What do you see yourself as mainly? Do you mainly see yourself as a cyclist, or what is your main identity?
I've never really thought too hard about that. I mean, I think other people see me as a bike rider, because a cyclist,
Yeah.
because I've cycled around the planet a couple of times. But I've sort of lived my life in projects, where I spend most of my time investing in running businesses. Um, do I see myself as that as a job title? No, not really. I mean, the thing that I love most is sort of building great teams and trying to scale stuff. Whether it's scaling the ambition to cycle around the world or scaling ecosystems, which is an amazing business I'm working with right now that does all the housing for Social Bite and has a real social enterprise to it as well. Don't really know. I define myself as Mark Beaumont. I'm not. I don't really define myself by the job title. I just like working with great people and doing hard things.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So of course you've been around the world twice, you've done so many other great things. Is there anything still on the bucket list?
Uh, in terms of expeditions, if that's what the question is, if somebody said, "Look, there's all the money in the world, go and do something solo and smash yourself," the answer would probably be no. I'm not that excited about that. I've done that a lot. I do get a lot of joy now in taking people to hard places. So earlier this year, I took a team out to Chile to try and do the Guinness World Record for the world's highest marathon. And yeah, I needed to be fit and be able to complete it myself, but I needed to have enough capacity to be able to support other people in that place as well. It wasn't about me figuring out if I could do it. It was really hard, but I knew I could do it. I was trying to have enough capacity left over where I could support other people's in that hard place. And we went with a team of 20 and 5 of us completed it. So um, the endurance podcast which I run and the projects that I get involved in tend to now be a space where I try and take other people into that endurance space, endurance in business, endurance in sport, as opposed to just trying to smash myself and figure out I kind of feel like I have done that to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm comfortable with what I can do. Unless I went back to training 25 hours a week, which I'm not about to do, there's almost no point in doing that. But each year I try and do something hard where I take people who are really stepping into the unknown.
Hmm. And who inspires you? Tell me about some of the people that have inspired you along the way.
Um, the people who have inspired me, I think I've mentioned some of them. I mean, I'm not somebody who would sort of sit here and mention names off the telly. It's people like David Peat who took me under his wing as a filmmaker. It's my mum who supported me from when I was a child. These days it would be my daughters, in terms of like, the energy to do hard things. So, for me, it's normally, there's a couple of friends who have been real mentors to me who I picked up the phone to when, I'm trying to figure out what to do. And, I've got a huge amount to thank them for, because people who have taken a real personal interest in my career. So the inspiration for me has come through knowing that they exist and being able to pull on their wisdom, as opposed to, Muhammad Ali or,
Yeah.
I've never been that inspired by people off the telly. For me, it's more been about, people who've taken a personal interest and have inspired me to think differently about what I'm doing.
Oh, fantastic. And if anyone's listening who wants to make their own life have a bit more adventure in it, what advice would you give them? What advice would you give people?
Well, I think, for me, I don't meditate, but I ride a bike and I run. For me, time in the outdoors is such an important antidote for, the stresses and strains that we all feel. I'm a better person when I've got that headspace and I say, unplugged from technology. It's so important to have that space. So yeah, it's a bit lifestyle medicine, but just doing stuff to be more physical, and time in the outdoors is such an important pillar to who I am as a person. So for anyone sort of thinking, I need to do this to lose weight or get fit or get healthier, sure, those things might happen. But I think the only way to make it consistent is nothing to do with those specific, goals. It's got to be like, it just makes me happier. Like fundamentally, we're fueled by our own contentment and happiness. So, and it's not by specific things about, I feel I need to do this. So adventure, time in the outdoors, remembering to be more childlike, never losing that sense of wonder. If the opportunity is to on a walk to head down the single track where you don't quite know where it goes versus the paved track, make sure you're the person that goes, to the path less known. And I think that mischief, that wonder, that what's down that track is something that you need to really look after. People become very safe. People become very, like sheep. And I think it's so important to maintain a level of mischief in your life, just a wry smile and I want to get outside, and using that time outside to be an equilibrium to, the other stress which we all have in our lives.
Yeah. That's a fantastic answer. I really love that. Keeping a bit of wonder, keeping a bit of mischief. I think that's fantastic, and that's a lovely way to finish. Mark, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really lovely meeting you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Superb. Well, keep up the good work. I enjoyed being on the pod.
Oh, thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conor's Crew. I hope you enjoyed hearing Mark's story and you got inspired to do something positive in your own way. Remember, it only takes one person to make a difference. I'll see you next time with another guest, another story, and more of the same good energy. Take care.